The reason we're talking about microphones so much and sound dampening so much is it is the number one thing to capture your voice that you have to get it right or you're not going to sound good in the mix. The first thing in the chain is the microphone and the room. So if those sound good to where the mic's able to capture your voice in a way that actually works for your voice, then the rest of the stuff in the chain is much, much easier. So get a mic. Any interface will do pretty much, as long as you're spending a couple $100s on it. But the microphone is absolutely essential that it works with your voice, or you're always going to struggle because nothing after that will work right. All right, so Drew, let's talk about production. I know we've been wanting to talk about this for a long time. And in the songwriting process through the mixing process, like I think this is very valuable for singers in general, because even if you're not a recording engineer, which you don't have to be at that level, although I can say some of us definitely geek out on that level. And you and I have been like doing mixing and mastering and recording and stuff for a while now. I know I did it professionally for 30 years too. You don't have to geek out. So I want to see if we can cover everything from just the simple way of approaching it and even kind of bare minimum what you need to be able to do it on your own, including why, maybe we start with that, why they would want to be able to do it. And maybe we'll geek out on a few things. Yeah. Some things are worth it, even if you're not a recording engineer, they're worth geeking out on and they're fun. So if anybody listening or watching this, definitely subscribe to get more of this and more of these conversations. And don't forget to join our community, which I'll mention later in the video. It's in the links. All right. So where would you start, man? Let's answer the question why. Why do they want to record? Why do they want to spend all this extra money on gear when all they usually have is just like a simple microphone that they walk on stage with, which is kind of the meme. Everybody jokes about singer never carries anything. But like, why spend $1,000 or more on professional gear to do it on your own?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest reason is because recording is the biggest teacher you can have of your own voice. And you're going to be represented on albums, even live. You're going to be using a microphone. So hearing yourself and what you sound like outward is important. One, because especially with pitch, you can learn pitch that way really, really quickly compared to other methods of hearing yourself and actively noticing the discrepancy between your pitch and the music. And then that can train you to be a better singer related to pitch, but also then your tone. When you listen back to it, you're like, oh, I should be more aggressive here when it comes to the mix of the music with my voice. If I'm more aggressive, it fits there better. And then that's a representation you have for like pre-production before you even go into the studio. And now when they show up, you've practiced the right aggression or the right technique to get you sounding the best for that part of the song or for the song in general. And then the slide that's represented well.
And just knowing what you sound like.
Yeah.
Because when we're in our own heads, we don't hear things accurately. That's why people don't like their recorded voice. Even speaking, it's like they hear it and they're like, that doesn't sound like I'm used to. That sounds terrible. Because they hear it as them, but it's not sounding like them. Yeah, it's weird, dude.
It is weird.
But when you record yourself a lot, you realize, oh, that's my voice. Or you start to be able to hear your voice objectively and say, I can hear that as a separate person. Does it sound good? And especially if you're training your voice, you want that. You want a decent setup for recording your voice, not just your phone. Your phone is a good start, but you want a decent setup so you can actually develop your voice to sound like how you want it to on recordings and how you want it to live. And you don't know what you sound like otherwise.
True.
Oh, yeah.
I want to drop. We'll see if Aston sponsors us eventually. But Aston, in terms of its components, all the material, everything that it's built, the way that it's built, it sounds amazing for the price that you can get for $400. And then you get a Halo. It's another $300. For less than $800, you can have the setup you need with the cable and an interface. You can use a Focusrite 2i2. Get that for less than $300. And for a little less than $1,200, you could have pretty pro sounding vocals and
Yeah,
mix
focus
ready.
right, the SSL, but this is Aston Halo for people that are just listening. I'm
Yep.
actually showing it off. Look it up. It's basically a reflection shield that I've recorded in the middle of a dance studio that had wooden floors, mirrored walls, glass on the other side, like all windows on one side, no sound treatment whatsoever in the middle of the room. So you do this and it like reverberates for a minute. And set up the Aston Halo with an Aston Origin microphone and did a cover in that room. It sounded like I was in a professional vocal booth.
Yep. It'll take care of a lot
Not
of
that I was a professional vocal booth. That'd just be
it.
weird.
You are the professional. Become the booth.
And those that are watching, I do have a different mic behind me right now because I inherited it from a friend.
Mm.
And the last microphone I had, what you see in a lot of the other videos, I got that one for basically doing a big, advertisement deal at NAMM one year. And so I've had a lot of microphones that I got through trade or through other ways. And I've always said and told all of my students this, if I was going to buy a microphone, it would be an Aston.
Yep.
The Aston Origins amazing, all around mic. It's very forgiving. The Aston Spirit is very professional sounding, a little bit bright, but it captures everything. It's a more poppy mic in my opinion, but you can make it sound awesome in rock too.
Yes. That's what I use for all my recordings on Spotify underneath Cope and my other product, Fecta. Everything is recorded with the Aston Spirit, just in the cardioid setting. And you can have figure of 8, you can have Omni. So you can use the Omni function to essentially capture like a live drum set. And you have something that you can then bring into a session, separate through tools to either get isolated drums or just have a reference for a jam. Be like, cool, now we have the drums and the idea for this song that we're writing. And then figure of 8 you can use for acoustic guitar, other things like piano to just capture a more full sound and even darken up your voice if you're just figure of 8 into, with
figure 8. You're talking polar patterns.
Yep.
Let's talk about mics for a second because
yes.
Most singers don't understand microphones.
Mm-hmm.
So this one sounds good, this one doesn't. This one looks cool, that one doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of singers, that's as far as they go. Some of them learn a little bit more, like the different patterns, like a cardioid pattern, super cardioid pattern, the you were talking about the Omni pattern, the figure 8, stuff like that, where it's different feedback rejection.
Yes.
So look it up too, because these charts are really useful.
Yes,
visual. To just understand where does it pick up sound around the capsule of the mic, the thing that's actually hearing the sound, and where does it cut the sound around that capsule. And if you look at, like, I like using supercardioids on stage because I can turn almost completely sideways to a monitor and it's still not feedback.
Yep.
So, or versus, actually, let's go into polar patterns first. Yep. Is there anything you want to say about the polar patterns besides what you just did? Right.
Mainly they're a tool that you can use from like a grand scheme of things for you to capture different sounds. Like if you are recording other instruments, they can be useful because depending on the polar pattern, you'll get different frequencies that are more present or less present based on the sound you're giving it, how close you are. But you'll always have like, if you're close, really close to it, you'll have the proximity effect of increasing the lows. And if you're further away, you'll capture more of the highs and it sounds weaker. There's less depth.
Yeah, that's any microphone.
Yep, exactly. So then
there are very few. Some of them have dual capsules, or they have a capsule in the front and the back. Usually, you see that with like large diaphragm, the type of mics you see in the studios, and those have a different proximity effect. Mm-hmm. It's harder to get it to change its sound, but they're also like twice as expensive.
Yep. So they're more forgiving. So you can be moving around and dancing in the booth, and it'll still capture a very similar sound, which can be useful to know. Otherwise, yeah, the patterns will give you, especially when you're live and you have as like a supercardioid or a cardioid pattern, the backside and around the back and the sides of the capsule will pick up less noise. And then thus you have the ability to sing into it and reduce the amount of feedback, where condenser will capture a lot more because of its circuitry, as well as, well, you're applying phantom power and things like that. But the pattern,
it's amplified.
The cardioid. Yep. And so You'll capture mostly what's in front, but because of the other components as well, you'll capture more sibilance, which is the higher frequencies and the more articulated parts of your voice. So knowing the difference there is useful. But yeah,
Let's just say a normal handheld mic
Yep.
is usually a dynamic,
yes,
which you're moving a magnet to translate into your voice into the signal that the electronics can understand.
Mhm.
And because of that, it's like it doesn't pick up as much room noise. You have to be really close to the mic to get a good sound. Like once you back away a couple of feet, you start losing sound very rapidly.
Mhm.
So it's great for live.
Yes.
And there are decent handheld condensers as well that have good feedback rejection. So if they have a closer proximity because they were tuned that way. But a condenser is works like your eardrum. It's a thin plate of metal that's electrified, that's capturing the sound. So as that metal moves, it translates directly into the electric signal. And it's way more sensitive. So you're picking up way more frequencies as well. So you get a much fuller sound out of it than you would a dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, when I'm recording in this studio, I have, and I'll show it off in a short sometime, but I have sound curtains behind my normal window curtains. And I have a sound curtain on my wall on the side here. And I have another one that I can hang up very easily to dampen the sound even more. But these are dampening. You're getting rid of reflections. If there's a dog barking down the street, you hear it in a condenser mic.
Yep.
You hear it. If the birds are loud that day, you're going to hear it. You're going to pick it up in that condenser microphone. My neighbor does summer camps, which will be for the next, she does it through part of the summer. And lots of kids. You hear them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no getting rid of them. If I pick up, I'm on a small diaphragm condenser right now. I just have it so treated you don't hear a bunch of the extra sound. I just like this because I can get far away from it and it doesn't change a whole lot.
Yep, you can get dramatic performance.
But if it was noisy, if these kids were going crazy and I wanted to record something quick without a bunch of their noise, I would grab a dynamic.
Yeah.
I'm holding a 58 right now. Not my favorite dynamic, but it is the most proven.
Yep.
The one that you see the most. Mainly because it's also built like a tank. And so it can take the abuse of being used night after night after night on stage in a club or venue.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, so we talk about the different types of mics there. Every mic sounds different. There are different capsules, which is the part that captures the sound. There are different capsules in these. There's different shapes. There's different padding. There's different grills on the mic that each change the sound just a little bit. And some mics sound really, really bright. Some sound really, really dark. And there's everything in between. So you have to know what type of mic fits your voice the best. Honestly, we already mentioned Asin, that the Origin is very forgiving mic. It's a great mic to use. It captures a whole lot of stuff. It's a condenser. If you need a general mic that's not too expensive, I would go with that totally. If you're unsure, if you don't mind a brighter mic, or you know that your voice works with a brighter mic, then go with the Spirit. Drew, you're using an SM7B right now in the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That is a mic that's definitely had a lot of really good marketing towards singers in the past decade, really. It's great for speech.
Yep.
It is great for speech.
100%.
Because you don't have to do much to it with EQ. When you record with it, I know it's popular. I know I'm going to get flack for this. It got really popular with screams in metal and rock. And now I see even pop singers using it for clean singing a whole lot too.
Jackson did.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he did. He did. And it can sound great with certain voices, like any other mic. It could sound good with you. It might not.
Yes.
But it also is a dynamic mic and doesn't pick up as many frequencies, which makes it way more forgiving. So you're not going to have these harsh frequencies standing out on you that you have to mix out of it. That's the main reason it's so popular. But it also, and Drew and you and I've talked about this a bit, in another episode, I believe, where recording, especially screams on a SM7B, it's hard to get it to stand out in the mix. It always sounds
Yep.
slightly buried.
Yes. Doesn't capture all like the top end that you really, really want. And it sounds a little bit darker. It's not as hot of a mic, so you have to add a lot to it to get the volume where you want it to be. And then it's a lot of constructive EQ to make it shine, which normally you want to stay away from that a whole lot. But that's another point.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. We'll get into that later. We're going to simplify that as much as we can.
Yes.
Real quick, I want to let you know about our Rock Singing Success community. You want a place to discuss this topic further or other topics, a place where you can improve your voice and your music career with courses and other resources, and even have a community of like-minded singers in rock and metal that are on the same path. Those that support each other and encourage each other along the way. Then join us at school.com/rocksingingsuccess. And that's SKOOL.com/rocksingingsuccess. And going back to the microphone, so like I used a 87 clone for years. I would get modified mics so they sounded really close to the Neumann 87. The U87 was a very sought after mic, considered a very general mic that was good for a lot of different things. I always loved the sound of a 47 on my voice, which is like a $10,000, $15,000, sometimes $20,000 mic.
Mm-hmm.
It's considered a pretty dark mic, and you hear that on a lot of old R&B albums. So that's the 47 was the most sought after sound for a long time.
Clean, very forward, brings a lot of bright tones out of the voice, and darkening it up will make it level out in the mix, especially when it's like the main thing in R&B.
Yeah. No, the thing about that, and the more expensive mics, you get this a lot in almost any really expensive mic. The highs aren't as harsh; they smooth out, so they sound crystalline. Like they can be very bright but not hurt your ears.
Yes.
And in the case of the 47, if you got really loud, it would start to distort a little bit with the tubes that were in it. I always loved that sound.
Yeah.
Until I found out my voice doesn't work with that mic. How many decades later? Where I finally had an engineer that was a good friend of mine say, hey, your voice is really hard to mix. It's like you're doing great on the lows, but as soon as you start singing high, it gets some weird sibilance that I can't get rid of. Right, well, it turns out part of that's the grill size, at the size of the top of the mic, and causing extra harmonics. And then I have a very bright voice up high that I don't have down low. And so that huge dynamic, it messed with it. So yes, I sounded great on a 47 until I sang up high. So now I have a really bright mic, which I never thought I would buy for my voice. Yeah. But I found out David Draymond had the exact same issues with his voice that I was having for the same reasons. And he went with like a Sony C800. I know we're talking gear here, but the Sony's C800G, I think is what it's called. It's most known in the rap circles, rap and hip hop. But that's what he went to because it could handle his higher frequencies when he did get loud and high up or distorted. And even though it's a really bright mic, there are ways to warm it up with other gear.
Yes.
So my light just turned off. Weird. Anyway. So that's what I use now. And because I inherited it from a friend and I did a ton of research on it, then I found that out about David Draymond. That's why I'm using it. But if you have the money, actually, I'm not even going to say that. Find the money, make the money before you buy $1,000 worth of gear.
Yep.
Spend $100, $200. It probably won't even cost that much if you go to the right place in a recording studio that has a good array of microphones. What they'll do is they'll set up a bunch of them at one time, probably 4 to 6 of them at a time, and have you sing something. And then you go and listen to it, say which one actually works with my voice. You go through different dynamics, like go through what your voice can do and the type of thing that we plan to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're screaming, you're singing low, you're singing high, you're doing distortion, like different things with your voice, and go listen to it with them and see which one actually works well, and listen to the engineer because they know how that's going to work in a mix too.
Yes.
And then you do it again, another 4 to 6 mics. And so you spend a couple hours in the studio, and now you know what type of mic works best with your voice for recording. And then when you go to buy a mic, you know exactly which one to get because it's in this family of microphones.
Yes.
And they may have had a really expensive mics, like the Sony or the U47, like Neumann's, and maybe the Neumann 103 is a great mic for a lot of people too, but it's got to work with your voice.
Yes. Yeah. Looking at like the frequency response could be huge of the mics that are very expensive. Finding one
Yep.
that has a curve that's very similar to, okay, it has the lows boosted or cut like this shape, and looking at it as shapes across certain frequencies on this graph to be like, cool, this will sound similar to mine. And then there's other.
Yeah. You can look at the frequency response. You could look at clones.
Yeah.
So you sounded great on the U87, like I thought I used to. You could look at clones of the U87, things that sound like the U87, or things that are in that family, like the NT1 from Rode is in that family. So you don't need to spend $10,000 on a mic. You can spend, how much is the NT1? Like 150, 200?
I was going to say no more than 200.
And it's a great starter mic. It's still going to have issues. Still not going to sound like the more expensive mic exactly, but it's in the same wheelhouse. So you know it's going to sound best with your voice in that budget.
Yep. And then you're training with a microphone that fits your voice. And when you upgrade, you'll find it's a pure upgrade.
The Ascent Origin's in that same family too. It was somewhere between an 87 and 47. It fit that Neumann sound to me. So we both recommend the Ascents, man. So
it's crazy. The amount of versatility, forgiveness you get from it, the quality, and just price. You can't really beat that. And then you can get a Halo with it. And if you do the black box bundle, or like you can do that with the Spirit, where you get a shock mount, you get everything you need for the pop filter in the front. So it gives you everything you need to just pair with the Aston Halo, and with this mic stand and a cable to your interface. That's all you'll ever need for a long time.
Yep.
Years.
So, okay, we talked gear. Interfaces, I can say these days, most all of them are good enough now.
Yep. If you're spending like
the cheaper ones tend to sound a little bit more muffled, a little bit. You're never going to notice in a mix. You won't notice.
Yep.
The high-end ones are just more crystal clear in what they're capturing, or there's certain ones that actually color the sound on purpose, like the SSL, which actually they make a cheap interface as well. It sounds really good, but it's a brighter sound. The Focusrite has a way to warm up your sound and amplify the high ends, so it sounds like an old Focusrite board. They just started putting that in their Scarletts.
Yep, the air function, I think.
But past the third generation of Scarletts, they're on the fourth generation now.
Yeah.
So the third generation is when it could finally handle loud frequencies well. Audient is great. I've always liked Audient stuff. I just like to put my interface in my bookshelf, and theirs didn't work for that. I have an Antelope interface that is absolutely incredible, but you kind of have to be a bit of a techie to use it because it's really hard to install and get moving with. So if you like gear, Antelope has an awesome array of interfaces too. So there's so many good ones out there, but you don't have to go expensive. You can stay cheap and you're going to be okay.
Yep. Yeah. If you're spending $300 or less, I'd say if you're spending $200 to $300, you're getting pretty good quality for a mix.
Yeah.
And you won't.
Even the new Behringer stuff, man, I never thought I would say that. Yeah. Even the new Behringer stuff is pretty good.
Normally it's like Behringer. Now
they merged with Midas, and all of their gear like upped big time.
Yeah, I know.
That was a couple years back.
You can do Universal Audio. The Volt is a new one that came out. Comes with some of their software that's exclusive to them. So that's like $300 for the Volt, versus spending like $2,500 for a regular Universal Audio Apollo, which are great. But you're spending an extra almost $1,200, $1,500 on software when it's a. Really
so what you got to look at is, what do you want? How much do you want to do? How simple do you want it to be? If you just want it stupid simple, go with a Scarlett. It's fine.
Yes,
it works just fine.
That's
or go with a cheaper interface. So you want a more like SSL type board sound, then go with the SSL. They have cheap interfaces and they're good.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Once you're ready to go like super professional, then you worry about the $1,000 interfaces. And honestly, you don't need to spend more than that.
No, not at all. The RMS.
You could get Neve makes one for $1,200 that is 2 Neve channels.
That's
in
pretty
an
good.
interface. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sorry, lots of gear.
Lots of gear. We got there. We're through it now. But once you have all the gear, then you can start recording professionally with anything like
So
this.
here's the thing: you need a mic. We already told you, go to a studio, figure out what mic sounds best for you. You need a large diaphragm condenser mic for recording your voice the most accurately. If you have no way to actually make it sound good in the room you're in, I'll talk about that in a second, but then go with the dynamic. It's okay.
Yeah.
You can go with the dynamic mic for now. The SM7B is fine. Yeah. Drew's pointing at his mic for those listening. If you're going to go with, sure, don't get the 58, get the Beta 58. It's a much better mic.
Mm-hmm.
It captures more frequencies. That's the whole idea here. You're getting more frequencies so that you hear a more accurate representation of what you sound like, rather than the normal 58, which massively colors your voice.
Yeah.
It sounds like a 58, not like you.
Yep. Yep. Some people like, some people don't. And then that's where the shootout is really important, just to try things. Experiment, find your lane that fits well for you, and then find something within that.
And I mentioned sound curtains. So
yeah,
I recorded, I had a mobile studio for a long time where I go to people's locations and record them there, wherever that was. And so I had a bunch of packing blankets. Just now I buy black ones with grommets, and they call them sound blankets. They're just packing blankets. They're the stitched packing blankets.
Mm-hmm.
So I recorded in a small storage space that's cinder block walls, cement floors, and like aluminum and like metal rafting. A really small space. Recorded drums in that spot because we threw packing blankets all over the rafters, and it sounded perfectly dry in there. That was insane. Packing blankets are the way to go, and you can get them for free on Craigslist. So there you go.
People just be getting rid of them, and then you just hang them, and then you're good.
That's how I dampen the sound in this room. So there's no reflections of the room.
Yes.
If you can't afford the Aston Halo, look for a few packing blankets like that.
Yep.
And the heavier, the better. But honestly, if you're getting them for free, you're probably getting the cheap ones. Get a whole bunch of them.
As many as you can, and just do it to taste. Be like, I'll put two on top of each other, and layer them like this, so the seams of the other ones are covered too, and just experiment with it, and you'll find a point where you.
That's to get rid of the sound of you being in a room, which amplifies the mids in your voice when you're just singing in a normal room. So it makes it more dry, and the mic's capturing you, not the sound of the room. Same with the Aston Halo. If you can afford it, it's incredible. I use both because I'm in a very small room. So even though the Aston Halo is great and I wouldn't record without it, I still dampen the room sound because there's certain frequencies that amplify from being in a small space. That's different than soundproofing. So use that. You guys that think you're going to get some sound blankets and won't annoy your roommates anymore, that's not true. It just dampens the sound. It does not. It does not block the sound. If you want to block the sound, get some green glue and extra acoustic drywall and permission from your landlord. Or actually, don't get permission from your landlord. Just put it up. They won't care.
Mm-hmm.
Take it down later if you have to and repaint. It's a project. If you want to soundproof, it is a project, and it's expensive.
Very expensive.
Especially for bass frequencies, which will get out even if you have a small crack that you forgot to cover and soundproof that little bitty space. Suddenly there's a bunch of bass getting out of the room through that spot.
Yep.
So
bass frequencies are very strong, and then if they find any way to get out, they're going to perpetuate themselves strong enough to be able to be heard through that crack.
If you're really intent on soundproofing, then budget for some mass load vinyl and make a murder room. That's what it's going to look like. Mass load vinyl on your walls, on your ceiling, on your floor, and then you put stuff on top of that to make it look better.
Yep.
So it doesn't look like you're going to kill somebody when they come in your studio.
You have to warn them every time they walk in. Like, we're recording, I swear.
If you're in an apartment worried about annoying your neighbors, and honestly, I say this to everyone because just training your voice in general, this is a problem. Go tell them.
Yeah.
And you're technically asking their permission, but it's more in a considerate way that's saying your needs. It's not saying, hey, what would be a good time for you for me to sing? Don't do that because they don't know. They don't have any reference for what you're talking about other than loud noise.
Yep.
So go to them and say, hey, I'm a singer. I sing between these times. I practice my voice or record my voice at these times during the day. Does that work for you? Most people are really cool with it because you finally considered them.
Yeah.
Instead of just singing, just making loud noise and stuff. So you consider them. They're like, oh, yeah, that'll be great. Or they'll actually suggest another time. It's very rare that I've run into a situation where the person was like, no, that doesn't work. You can't do that. That's very, very rare.
Mm-hmm.
And if that happens, start budgeting for an ISOVox or something, like something that is a vocal booth.
Yeah.
ISOVox is a portable one. It's very expensive, but so is it building a vocal booth.
Yep. You can use things like PVC to build your frame, but then the material you use regardless and to make sure it's tight.
You're getting back into soundproofing.
Yep. For a small PVC frame.
And just look up how to do it. If you're not particularly versed on that, then you're still going to be spending ISOVox is, I think it's $1,000 to $2,000, depending on which one you get. That's cheap. Yep. That's cheap as compared to a full vocal booth, which is if you're not building one yourself with cheap materials that you know how to do it and still make it soundproof, then you're looking at $4,000 to $8,000 to get one that's pre-built. You just kind of piece it together. So very expensive, very expensive.
Ask your neighbors first.
Ask your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And if your closet, go to the room furthest away from them.
Yeah.
If your closet is a decent space for that, just make sure you put up some sound blankets because, like my office, you're in a small space. You're going to get reflections back into the mic that you don't want. So the clothes aren't enough. The clothes are not absorbing sound like you will need them to. They're too loose.
Yep.
They're not dense. Anyway, so soundproofing is all about density. Sound dampening is all about absorption rate. So think insulation type stuff, which the sound blankets work really well for. I don't want to go all into that because not a lot of singers are interested in doing construction. So hopefully the sound blankets and the Aston Halo or the ISOVox or something in that vein, you're starting to get the picture now. Oh, let me mention too. There's a really popular product, and as a sound engineer, I want to mention this because it annoys the hell out of me sometimes. The eyeball, which is a big piece of foam you put over your microphone. So it's one thing to have the Aston Halo. If you put your mic too deep into the halo, it's going to color it. It's going to make it darker because you're not allowing air around the mic. And it's kind of creating a well behind the mic that's building up in bass frequencies. So what do you think happens when you take a ball of closed foam, like the type that actually does dampen sound, and stick it over your microphone? This isn't the pop filter like you see on handheld mic stuff. That's open foam. They're open cell foam where it's not actually blocking sound or absorbing sound. Closed cell captures the sound and makes it bounce around a whole bunch inside of it. So it's dampening it. It's lowering the volume. So when you take that thing that tends to hold frequencies and you put it right up against your mic, what do you expect to happen? The mic gets weird. And I would say the ISOVox does this some too. They make special mics for the ISOVox by Erland microphones that have a different type of capsule. It's a triangle, so it doesn't reverberate a whole lot. Mm-hmm. But I guess what I'm saying is you stick a big piece of sound dampening material over your microphone, it's going to sound like you're cupping the mic. It's going to sound like your polar pattern's messed up. So it changes the sound of the mic just in that alone. When you cup a microphone, even a handheld mic, it suddenly becomes an omnipolar pattern. It's picking up everything. There is no feedback rejection anymore. It picks up everything. So it's a version of cupping the mic just for a large diaphragm, a big
all
studio
the time
mic
too. Like when it's in there, your whole performance is cupped. Like you're
and the bass frequencies are starting to pull. They're starting to stack up because they can't escape as easily.
Yep.
So the mic completely changes its sound when you stick one of those things on it, which kind of ruins everything we've talked about the microphone.
Yep. All the other things are not important. They don't do anything anymore.
Let me say this, and a note to my editor: you can cut this and put it at the beginning somewhere that it makes sense. because this is super, super important to know. The reason we're talking about microphones so much and sound dampening so much right now and for so long is that it is the number one thing to capture your voice that you have to get it right or you're not going to sound good in the mix.
Exactly.
The first thing in the chain is the microphone and the room. So if those sound good to where the mic's able to capture your voice in a way that actually works for your voice, then the rest of the stuff in the chain, the cable, the interface, even getting a good mix after that is much, much easier.
Yep.
So get a mic. Any interface will do pretty much, as long as you're spending a couple $100s on it. They're all pretty dang good. But the microphone is absolutely essential that it works with your voice, or you're always going to struggle because nothing after that will work right.
Yeah. You can't fix. It's all about the idea of like source material, source tone, and like what you're capturing. You can only do so much with it. So if you capture a good sound, the mixing will just make it even better versus trying to fix something.
Same goes for live. Handheld mics, same goes for live. If you find a handheld that works really well with your voice, that is gold because it's much easier for the sound engineer to mix you. Now, they're going to think 58, that sounds good on everybody. That's what I'm used to. You should use a 58. So put it in your writer before you play a show that you're using a different microphone. Here's the frequency response of it. So they know what to expect. And they might still argue with you. So I do want to say that before we jump into other production stuff. If your sound man disagrees with you, go with what they say.
Yeah, just
because
make it easy.
They are responsible for making you sound good that night. If you piss them off, you're not going to sound good no matter what you do.
Then you don't get another show.
Yep. If you make best friends with the sound man before the show, you're good. You're gold.
You could have them do sound for you at a cafe, and then you'll get paid. Great. Make them your friend.
Yes. Okay. So we talked about the outboard gear, the absolute essential outboard gear.
Yes.
Some guys want to get into compressors and EQs and stuff that make them sound even better going into the recording. I personally do that all in plugins.
Yep.
I've done it both ways. Done it this long enough. We didn't have computers for recording when I started. It was all on 2-inch tape where you physically have to cut the tape and tape it with a little piece of Scotch tape and keep going. But I usually approach plugins that way, where I'm thinking, what's my outboard gear? If I was actually in a studio, I'd be going through a Neve console because that's my favorite sound. I would be going through these different compressors and EQs because I know what they are. I've used them before. I've been a recording engineer for a long time, and they sound awesome.
Yep.
So that's the first thing in my chain before I even mix. It's like I want to sound like I'm in that studio.
Yep.
Most people do not need to worry about that.
Nope.
Captured your voice and a good mic. You have a decent interface. You're good to go.
Yep. You can do all the rest of the effects.
I didn't want to mention that much, but yeah, if you're all about outboard gear, go for it. Have fun. Just know what you're doing.
Yep.
do the work to know what you're doing.
Exactly. Before you spend $10,000 on a compressor.
Yeah, I used to have a $30,000 vocal chain, but it was all in plugins that were part of my interface. So yeah, so it didn't cost me $30,000.
Exactly. There's ways to get around that through mods, through plugins. There's so many ways to do it. They're just the right purchase of an interface. Oh,
I mentioned the Neve interface, for instance. Those are 2 Neve channels. It's not just an interface trying to sound crystal clear.
Yep.
The SSL interface, it's a brighter interface when you turn on that option because it has a 4K. It emulates the board. The new Scarlett emulates their old board if you want it to.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's trying to get you a clear sound without coloring it in any way.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
again, with
record yourself.
Yep. Record yourself. That's the main thing is recording yourself, kind of bringing it full circle before we transition is like you're recording yourself to know what you sound like. So you know what you sound like to other people in a live setting, in a recorded setting, because ultimately you're going there if you're serious about music and you're listening to this podcast or watching. It's like you're trying to up your game. So these situations are what you're going to find yourself in. And one or the other, you're going to need to know how to do this stuff and make yourself sound good so you can be ready for the live or you can be ready for the studio. And then
Yeah.
you get to a point, maybe you can just do it all yourself. But that
Exactly. Now you have a good setup. You may not need to go into the studio to
spend
record your voice.
$4,000 for a few songs.
You can maybe get them to mix it because you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But now you have a great sound that you can just send to them. But you've got to have that great sound. Otherwise, they'll want you to come in and record on their mic in their system because there was too much room in your sound, or there was your mic didn't sound right for your voice.
And that's more money.
Do the work. Do the work up front. Do the work up front. I have plenty of students who record with an Aston and then send it in the studio to get mixed.
Yep.
And they just made sure that, well, they had the Aston Origin is the one I'm thinking of. Aston Origin and a Halo was good enough to get professionally mixed, and the mixing engineer didn't know any different.
Yep.
Saying.
Yeah, that's $700 right there. We're shipping.
Yep.
So you can do quite a lot with the stuff we have now. But ultimately, yeah, you want to get into a place where you can be recording yourself and thus saving yourself money. It's an investment you're putting down where you get the gear, you get the time under your belt to learn these things. And then that's saving an extra $500 to $1,000 per song, depending on where you're going of recording time.
It doesn't matter which recording software you use, which DAW, digital audio workstation. It doesn't matter which one you use as long as it's simple enough for you to use it.
Yep. Reaper's great and free. You can get
to start out. Reaper isn't free anymore.
Oh, they made it so you can't just be like, I'll not start my trial. You just like
I don't think you can do that anymore.
Well, Cubase is great. Most
BandLab, Cakewalk.
Less.
BandLab makes a free one. They also own Cakewalk, which is actually really good at what it does too. Those are free. If you're a Mac user, GarageBand is okay to start with.
Yep.
There's also Ardour, which I have reasons for not using that, but but they're good.
Yep.
Just I won't go into it on a public podcast. They're good.
Cubase is $100 for the Elements version.
I use Logic. It cost me a few hundred, but I've used it since way before Apple owned them. But since I'm on a Mac, I didn't have the option to use Cakewalk like I was getting my students to do. So just look at what's out there. There are a lot of good ones. Bitwig is a new popular one. I'm not a fan of Ableton Live for normal recording unless you're planning on using it live too, because you need loops. You need to go into that stuff. It's a little bit harder to use than some of these others because it's geared towards live. That said, I have some students who that's what they record on.
You can do it.
So that's the workflow they learned. So whatever you're up for, as long as you know where to turn on recording, where to set up your, do a tutorial, honestly. Yes. Just do a tutorial. Learn how to set up your bit rate, your sample rate, so the lowest latency you can get with your interface in that software. Latency being when I snap, how long before I actually hear it.
Yep. Through the
Is
microphone.
It so little, like
the headphones.
3 to 10 milliseconds that I can snap and you don't hear the delay? Or am I going and you hear like what? Like
you don't want that
sound. Or like, hey, like, no, you don't want that. So figure out what those settings are to get you set up. And this, I would say a sample rate. Old CDs were 44.1. You guys are going to know what this is once you get into it.
Yep.
Refer back to this if you need to. Most film is 48 kilohertz in sample rate and 22. I'm saying bit rate or sample rate. Now I'm confused.
Sample.
Oh yeah, bit rate is resolution. Bit rate's resolution. 24-bit is what you want to go for. I usually record in 48. Some people record in 96 kilohertz. That I can't really tell the difference in most mixes, so I just record in 48.
Yep.
You can go higher and go up to like 192, and it's like this super precise thing that most people will never need, and it takes up a whole lot more memory.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So if you're wanting to go on a super pro level, go for it. Go 192, go 96 even. 48's enough.
Yep.
And when people record in 44.1, I'm a little taken aback. It's because there is a difference between 44.1 and 48, especially if you need to put it to a video where you have to go back up to 48 anyway. Anyway, all right. And noise and just think of bitrate and sample rate kind of like your resolution.
Yes.
So if you look at a video resolution, the lower it is, the fuzzier it is. But honestly, at 48, you're not going to notice. You're not. 44, you might notice some noise in it. But anyway.
Yep.
Okay. Watch a video, get set up, know where to press record, know where to arm the track for recording, and know where the plugins are and where to put those in. And I think you're good to go to actually press record. So Drew, I'll let you take it from here for a little while. What is the production process here that they're looking at?
So when you're starting, I bring like students and friends through a process of getting familiar with the program first. And the first thing I give them is you want to make it your new journaling place. Instead of your phone for voice memos, you use now Cubase, Pro Tools, Audacity. That's a problem if you're using Audacity, but you can use it for journaling. You can use it for journaling in this case, but you're using your DAW to essentially get familiar with, I am recording things and listening back to it. And then thus you have something to be able to reference what you sound like in your setup that you have now. And you can easily take an MP3 or a WAV file that you have and drop it into the project and sing along with it. And that could be a great way to do like self karaoke. You can set it up as your own karaoke setup if you want to be able to play in a room. There's so many ways you can use just that basic function of I can record my voice and I can hear it through monitoring to be able to know this is what I sound like. Then the idea of getting into other instruments, then you start to think about things like a hierarchy of where now if you're getting multiple instruments, you're eventually going to need to be, okay, the vocals are too loud, so I move them down. I bring them down in volume. I bring the drums up. And then as you get further down, you can separate, I have a double here for my vocal. I have a harmony for my vocal. I have a snare drum or for the drums. I have a kick drum. And then you build it where you have the sum of all your sounds coming out through the main meter and everything. And it's getting a little deeper, but essentially you want to be able to know where everything is going. If you're building out your vocals, just know that your harmonies and your doubles and your main vocal, they'll all be feeding to a place where you can control all of it in one point and just turn all the vocals down or all the drums up and all the guitars. And then that's where I would just kind of go next is like getting basic busing, which is what that is called of, okay, this is where the actual vocal track is, where I can see the waveform of my recording. And then I have the doubles, the harmonies, these physical, the sounds you actually have as your tracks, they all feed to one area. So then you can manipulate them all together and start getting levels a little bit easier. And then that's when you're starting to get into mixing and songwriting a little bit more. You now have other instruments and you want to be able to, the reason I'm saying all this is you want to be able to just listen back to what you've just written and what you started working with in a way that feels a little bit more appealing than just, well, that's the sound and that's how loud the drums were and they're overpowering the vocals completely. But this is my song. Like you want to be able to have a little control to be able to then have something that sounds representable to your ears and sounds nice enough and to your bandmates, to your friends, and being able to just
even if you're recording over backing tracks, it's the same deal. You don't have to go full on into a mix.
No.
Oh, I do want to say too, set your interface to where if you're not super familiar with it, get really loud, like a little louder than you would actually do in the recording, and make sure that you're only hitting the yellow, you're not hitting the red, and you're barely hitting the yellow, if that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a little bit more versed in what you're doing, then shoot for like -10, -12 decibels. That's what you're shooting for. But if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say that, just under yellow.
Just under the yellow.
Where it hits the yellow every now and then.
Mm-hmm. And then you're not
when you're being super loud. And then when you listen back, it's gonna be really, really quiet on the quiet parts. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I had one student reach out to me when he first recorded on his own. He used to come here and record. First recorded on his own on an Ascent Origin and Halo. And was saying, Draven, this sounds like crap, man. I can't get it to sound good. This sounds terrible. It's like, well, did you put a compressor on it? Maybe a little bit of reverb? That's just listen back. This is not mixing, guys. This is just listening back. Stick a compressor on it. Put a preset on it if you're unsure what you're doing. Otherwise, like set to like a 4-to-1, 8-to-1 ratio, depending on the dynamics of your voice and how heavy a rock you're singing. That's for every 8 decibels it goes over the threshold, it pulls it down to 1 decibel. Or at 4-to-1, every 4 decibels it goes over, it pulls it down to 1 decibel. So it's controlling the dynamics of your voice more. And then set your threshold so it kind of evens out the voice a bit. Otherwise, just use a preset. If that's too confusing to you, look up some tutorials on how to use a compressor. And if it's outside your wheelhouse, use a preset.
Use a preset.
That's going to even out your vocals. It's going to make it sound better. A compressor evens it out. It takes the highs and pulls them down. The exciter part of it takes the lows. I know I threw in another term. It's part of the compressor. It takes the lows and pulls them up a little bit. So your voice is a lot more even and you're going to be able to hear yourself. Then throw a tiny bit of reverb on it. Not a whole lot, a tiny bit, because you're not used to hearing your voice dry. When you sing in a room, the room reverberates. So while you're recording, pull one ear off a little bit, pull on the headphones or I use in-ears. Take one ear off just a little bit so you can hear yourself in the room again. When you're listening back, you're recording dry on a tiny capsule. So put a little reverb on it to put yourself back in a room. Those two things, compressor and reverb, it'll sound professional to your ears. It'll sound way better than dry.
Yep. You want to walk up to your microphone and pretty much the effect, it's like the wow effect that a lot of my friends or like students will come in and they'll just never recorded their voice before. And I'm just using compressors to make it feel very close and intimate because you're leveling out all the volumes of when I get loud, the compressor starts grabbing and bringing the volume down and not letting it jump up as much past a certain threshold, like we've mentioned. And then having the reverb makes it feel like you're in a room and you're like, hey, if you have delay or just, hey, you get a little bit of the effect on it where it's like, wow, I sound like I'm in a pro vocal studio. And just those two little things, the reverb and the compressor will just make stepping in, putting your headphones on and going up to the microphone feel like a wow experience. You're like, whoa.
Put the reverb after the compressor too, so you're not compressing the reverb.
That will.
Reverb's last thing in the chain. Reverb and delay. Those are the last things. But play around with it till you find a sound you like. And if you're still not used to hearing yourself in cans or in the headphones, take one ear off. So you're back in the room and you're more familiar with that sound. So many students have had to do that because the first time they went to record, they couldn't sing. They were not used to hearing themselves like that. So another reason to keep recording is get used to your voice. But
those main things will get you a majority of the way through getting through songwriting, and the rest of it's like you then you're getting into real mixing of like, I'm EQing this thing to do this. You mainly as a singer want to be able to control the levels and hear your voice and being able to know the hierarchy in a general sense of like, okay, I keep turning down the main vocal, but everything else is louder. And then you just have the ease of access of all vocals down. You can mix the vocals against themselves to be like, cool, when they're just vocals, the harmony, the double sounds good in relationship to the main. And then you just sync that in with your main bus that everything moves to for your vocals. The main vocal bus then can be laid into the other instruments, just like all the guitars can be laid into the rest of the mix. Just moving.
And we're talking very simple mixing here, just volume movement.
That's it.
When you send it off to a mixing engineer, take off the plugins, take off the compressor and the reverb and any plugins you put on it. Give it to them dry. Tell them what you want it to sound like. Give them a reference for what you want it to sound like. If you're mixing it yourself, keep it simple. So let's dive into the mix a little bit because there will be people that want to mix it themselves or even thinking about it, and there will be those that don't know that'll hear what we have to say and either say, "Oh hell no, I'm not doing that," or be like, "Hey, that sounds simple." So learn EQ and compression.
Yes,
just look it up. There are tons of videos out there on EQ and compression. I could go into it here. I go into it in our rock singing course, or rock singing complete. I have a chart on different parts of the EQ and stuff too. Different parts of the EQ are going to sound different for your voice. The human voice sits at 250 hertz for body, about somewhere in there. 500 hertz is nasality and room, up to 1,000 hertz. I'm just throwing random numbers out here. I know this is all part of the EQ spectrum.
Yep.
Uh, two, 2 to 4K. I'd say actually 1 to 4K is where the presence of your voice comes out. Above that, it starts to get sibilant, where you hear your S's and T's really a whole lot. And then above that's more airy. Okay, I just went over it really quick because look it up. You're not
Yep.
going to remember that. You need a chart or a couple tutorial videos on how to mix your voice, how to use EQ for voice, how to use compression for voice. Put your EQ first because that is the most important thing for getting you to sit in a mix, not the volume, the EQ. Because if I turn down that 2K just a little bit, it's going to sound quieter without actually being quieter. If I turn it up at 2K, 3K, it's going to sound louder. And I didn't touch the volume at all.
Yep.
It just stands out differently. And knowing that, okay, my voice sits around, it's about 300 hertz in the body right now. And I got it right at like 2.5 kilohertz for the presence of my voice. Those sound really good on me. There better not be another instrument that has those two frequencies amplified.
Yes.
They're going to be moved over a little bit. Say, oh, the guitars also sound good at 2.5 kilohertz. They won't when you put your voice with it. So the voice is going to be the guitars will be amplified at 3 kilohertz or 1.5 or 1 or 2 or like somewhere around there where it's separated in the EQ spectrum so that the instruments are now separated.
Yes.
So mixing, you're looking at, I like to do an EQ and then 2 compressors, one that's fast, so it's catching all the transients, that's all the hits of my voice, and one that's slow, so it's smoothing out the dynamics of the voice.
Yes.
So one that's fast going into one that's slow. That's an awesome way to mix. If it's overwhelming to you, just use one and use a preset. It's fine.
Yep.
It is perfectly fine. Put an EQ. The EQ, you need to know your voice. You can't just use a preset. It's not going to work as well as knowing how to use an EQ. Know how to use an EQ. The compressor, know how to use a compressor, but if you're getting frustrated with it, put it on a preset. As long as it sounds good enough. Or start with a preset.
Yeah, and a cool training thing you can do is going between presets and just looking at the settings of what you're using in your single plugin to be like, oh, I see what it's different between these two presets, and this is what it sounds like in difference. And you can use that as training. You can play with it. I recommend playing with it. And there's tricks with EQ. If you're not sure what to boost or cut and you hear something weird going on in your voice, take a peek, like a node where in the EQ spectrum where you click in your plugin and you have the ability to control a little arch that will essentially change the EQ in terms of its loudness or the frequency of its loudness by either making it louder or quieter. And you can drag it around really high up or really low in a thin or wide way. And you can start to hear by playing around what is changed in your voice or the instrument, whatever you're messing around with in terms of the EQ and where it's located, to be able to understand, oh, 300 hertz sounds like this. Let me drag it down and see if it works. Cool.
Yeah, so we do a narrow Q is what that's called, where it's affecting a smaller area.
Yes.
So when you boost it 18 decibels and start dragging it over the EQ, everything sounds bad. But you'll hear that particular frequency of what it sounds like.
Yes.
Now, if you want to get more complicated, sure. The first thing I do is resonance control, where I take out all the frequencies that shouldn't be resonating a whole lot, or I can do that sweep like you just talked about and find those resonances, or I have plugins that find them for me.
Yep.
But and then I EQ the voice from there.
Yes.
So I have a bunch of helps. There are a bunch of cool plugins out there that kind of listen to your music for you and suggest EQ. It gives you a good starting point. That's how I like to use presets when I use them too. It's a good starting point, and then I coax it from there.
They'll do Nectar, which can really help with your voice and just getting you a chain that fits a certain style you're going for.
Yep.
And you can build a whole chain for you. Isotope's product, Nectar. I think they're on
Gamma Vocal Suite. I like using for metal and like screams and stuff too, because everything's right there in it.
Yep. And you can manipulate in there and play with presets to affect an entire vocal chain to see what those differences can make for your voice.
Yep. The full vocal chain like that, like gamma, there's a de-esser in there as well that'll take out the sibilance of your voice. It has like a couple compressors, a few different chains you can go through in the same channel strip. It's pretty cool. There's some really cool stuff like that, and it has distortion. So if you're distorting your voice, then putting a tiny bit of saturation on it, like another distortion plugin, can help it. You don't want to put too much, but it helps saturate it, helps make it thicker.
Yep.
Which I do want to mention that too. Look up parallel compression too if you guys are interested in it. I might put up this whole guide that I have about this. I don't know. I'm going to ask the originator of it, and I have my notes on his stuff too, but he no longer gives it away. But I have a full mixing template. You guys can look up that stuff too if you're really interested in mixing. Parallel compression, or even just doubling your vocals using a vocal doubler, can really thicken things up as well and bring out the frequencies that sound good in your voice naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So there are extra things to do, but essentially it's EQ, compressor, and then effects like reverb or delay.
Yep. That will get you 95% of the way to what you're looking for. Saturation can add a little bit. You can do delay throws, all these little automation things. And automation is just having certain things happen at times that you dictate with pretty much a pencil as like of how much is going on at a certain section of a song. So then those are all extra stuff. But to get
I have a lot of things. I have two EQs where one that's for the verse and one that I add on top of it for the chorus.
Yeah.
That just turns on in the chorus because there's so many more instruments happening. That extra EQ turns on and still makes the voice stand out. It stands on top. Like there are tricks you could use for that too, though, like side chaining. And I'm not even going to go into all this stuff because it will lose some people. Side chaining is where your plugin's listening to another track. So side chaining all the music into Soothe 2 that's on your vocal track. And it's the other way around. It's the other way around. Side chain your vocals into Soothe 2 that's on your music bus.
And then it'll affect the music to let your vocal shine through.
Yep.
Totally affect.
So every time you sing, it cuts those frequencies a certain amount on the music so that your vocals stand out. Yeah, that little things like that you could do. But there's been some with the wrong mic that I've recorded where it was EQ compressor. The compressor brought out the wrong things, another EQ. Okay, let's coax it a little bit more, put another compressor, then another EQ. Like I had this huge stack of EQ compressor that I was trying to just shape their voice slowly into something. You could totally geek out on it like that and go under a microscope, essentially. But in the end, it's still EQ, compression, reverb. That's like the basics of it.
Yes.
And then if you're sending it to another mixing engineer, take those off of it. Just remember that. I can't stress that enough.
Give them dry. Give it dry like it sounds bad, but like they'll know exactly what they need to do to get it to the point of adding those simple things back and then doing the rest of that, maybe automation, side chaining, parallels, saturation, whatever they want to do to help get it to the next level. And listen to them. Go in sessions when you're having a mixing engineer do something. If they're local, if they want to do a Zoom session live while they're doing it, that can really help you understand what their thought process is for how they're affecting your vocals. And if you're at this point,
just know that takes what could take them. If they're just mixing your vocals into a backing track, for instance, that's probably going to take them an hour at the most. But if you're there and you're constantly providing feedback, it's going to take them 3 to 5 hours. So be mindful of that when they're working. Let them work. And every now and then chime in and say, what did you just do?
Observe.
Or ask them ahead of time. Say, while you're working, can you explain your thought process? Can you be out loud? Like do your thought process out loud just so I know what's going on. And then let them work.
That's what I did. And that's how I learned a majority of everything I've ever done was being in the studio and just being curious.
Yeah. But there are so many mixing tutorials out there for different styles even. If you want to deep dive on it, go for it. But in the end, you don't have to. No. You don't. But being able to put out your own songs, that's super powerful.
Yeah.
It is very powerful. And it takes time to learn how to mix. It definitely takes time. We teach that.
Yep.
So it's not something that's prominent in our rock singing success group, and it's not in our courses right now, but we do teach it. So
Yeah.
you're welcome to take lessons with us as well over that type of thing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we walk them through the gear that they need, which we talked about a whole lot because it's super important, guys. Like making sure the right mic is there, making sure the room is not reverberating a whole lot, so you sound professional from the get-go. And then basics of mixing, a little bit deeper dive in some of the things we mentioned there. And if you're playing an instrument, look up how to EQ that. The EQ is the most important. If you got that down, if everything's EQ'd correctly, it's going to sound good.
Yep.
And then it's just a matter of adding sauce to it. How the compressors take away the dynamics a bit, so they're not super quiet and then super loud. And then everything else is sauce. Doubling parallel compression, which is another way to kind of amplify certain frequencies. Delays, reverbs, anything that you're adding. It's just sauce after the EQ and a little compression.
Yep. And a lot of those like frequencies you can find for EQ for other instruments, like I use this all the time, still Draven. Bobby
Owsinski.
Bobby Owsinski, Magic Frequencies has a
his books were amazing.
Great website just to see numbers and instruments to know, like, generally start here.
What I did when I first read his book and found the Magic Frequencies thing, and then I actually listened to David Moulton's stuff too. I read his books and went through his courses on training my ears to hear certain frequencies. But I took Bobby Owsinski's Magic Frequencies and went into my EQ presets and made that my starting point. I just set the points. I always had to add one in the middle, like around 500, but all the other points were based on Magic Frequencies for each instrument. So I'm like, that's my starting point. Okay, vocals, they're 250, 500, 1.5K, 2.5K, 7K, 10K, whatever. I don't remember, but I had points based on that chart, and that's where I started. Vocals are different. You mix it once, and it's the same microphone in your voice. You mixed it. You're good. You've got your sound for the frequencies. You'll rarely have to move it unless you're singing to a backing track. Then you might have to move it a little bit to make it fit a little bit better with that backing track because it was mixed different.
Yep.
But the other instruments, once you get into that and start, I have a preset for piano. I have a preset for acoustic guitars, a preset for electric guitars, for high gain electric guitars, for bass, for like each instrument. I went through Magic Frequencies and just created a preset in my EQ for that.
Yeah.
So then I don't have to guess. That is my starting point because somewhere around each of those points is where that instrument's going to sound best.
Yep. Small little adaptations from there will pretty much solve all your issues EQ wise.
Yep.
So very useful.
Okay. The songwriting process, I do want to separate these, man. So the songwriting process is when you're playing around.
Yep.
Have EQ and a compressor on it, and maybe a little reverb. Actually, have just a compressor and a little reverb. Don't even worry about the EQ at first. Just so you can listen back and it sounds right. And build the song around that, whether you're doing it with your own instruments, you're trying to put in a backing track, you're getting somebody else to help you. Just that's your scratch thing. Don't even worry about mixing it except for the volume levels.
Yep, that's it.
Get quick volume levels. And maybe play around with some effects because you're having fun and think the guitar would sound really cool wobbly right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put a tremolo on it. It's like just because it sounds cool. And that's something you would keep later. Once you're ready to mix, though, take off as many plugins as you can that aren't, how do I even describe that, man? If you want that tremolo effect in the guitar because you needed that tremolo effect to get the sound you wanted, leave it.
Yeah. Even do like wet and then dry and then make a note for that track to be like, want this effect.
Exactly. Send them two. And if in doubt, send them two.
Yep.
But if you got tons of distortion from a plugin on your distorted vocals or your screams, and you've got all these different effects stacked on it that you were having fun with, send them a dry one, send them the wet one. and let them take it from there.
Yep.
Once you're diving into the mix yourself, take it slow. Here's the stickler. When you're learning to mix, and I'll slow down saying this, but when you're learning to mix, your first mix is going to take you, I hate saying this, but it'll take you probably 120 hours for that first song because you're learning, you're experimenting, you don't know what you're doing. And you need to take breaks because your ears get tired. So 10, 15 minutes into that mix, if you're listening too loud, especially, you're not hearing the same thing anymore. So take a break, take a 10, 15-minute break, come back to it with fresh ears, and then keep mixing.
Yep.
That'll actually save you time because if you mix for 3 to 5 hours on a song, I guarantee you the next day you're going to come back and listen to it and go, oh, that's terrible. Every single time.
Yep. Lots and lots of breaks. Ear fatigue is real, and it will just mask and confuse what you hear.
Yeah. The good news is your second mix is probably going to cut that time in half. Your third mix will cut it in half again. You might actually be down to 10, 12 hours on a mix at that point. These are real numbers, guys. I'm not making these up.
Yep.
It's normal to take 8 hours on a song. It's normal unless you have really good speakers, really good studio monitors. In my case, I use the Slate VSX because it gives me amazing studio monitors in a coffee shop. It sounds like you're in the room. And I've mixed on some of these in my career. I've actually mixed on some of these systems that are in these headphone emulations. Well, the emulated studios and speakers inside the VSX headphones, they're not even emulated. I don't even know how to say that. They took like a binaural measurement of it. So sometimes I forget. And I think I left my speakers on while I have the headphones on.
I do that all the time.
Because it sounds like you're sitting in front of speakers.
Take them off. You're like, oh, the speakers aren't on. Okay.
If you want really damn good speakers that you can have anywhere, the VSX are totally worth it. Even the platinum version where you can check your mix in a car, multiple cars, multiple systems, multiple headphones, and have all these different studios to hear different things in your mix. I'm not going to go into a full commercial for them. They are absolutely amazing. I sold my good monitors after I got those. Yep. Now I have just simple desktop speakers I would never mix on. If you're really into it, if you really want that experience of having speakers in your room, make sure your room is treated so it's not bouncing everywhere. Make sure you listen at low volumes because you're not in a professional studio. Get smaller speakers. Near field is what they're called, near field speakers. And I would look at maybe Cali. Their 6s and the 8s are good. Their 6s is their LP6. Cali has a good sound. iLoud has been really getting, that's IK Multimedia's iLoud speakers.
Mm-hmm.
They're the one with 2 cones in it. Those have really been doing well lately, and they're pretty damn amazing from what I've heard. Because they allow you to measure your room, like they have that full ARC system where you can measure the frequency response in different spots in your room, and they adjust accordingly.
Yeah, they attenuate.
So they sound professional, but still, that's more expensive than the VSX headphones. So I'll leave it at that.
The headphones. That'll do. If you want, for me, same thing. It's like I have PreSonus here, the Aris 8XTs, I think, and they just look cool now. That's their
Aris 8s are good. They're good.
They're
good speakers.
I'll use them sometimes as a reference, but I will never go off of the speakers alone. I will always have VSX to be my final check, if not pretty much everything I do for the mix.
Yeah, and VSX is its own ecosystem. So I found the speakers that I like to mix on because it's what I'm used to and have always mixed on in my career that are really damn expensive speakers. So they're in my headphones now. And then I check it on a bunch of other speaker systems and other things after I do a first pass on the mix. And that's the other thing. Absolute most important, which is funny we're mentioning it last. Most important thing when you're mixing, have a reference mix. Yeah. Start there.
Oh my God.
Start with something. I like this mix. I like how it sounds. So what's awesome about this is when you have a reference mix, you get to hear how it sounds on your current speakers. and then try to get it in that same ballpark on your current speakers.
Yep.
If you have other ways of listening to it, it's the same deal. Same deal. If you go to your car, because you don't have the headphones I'm talking about, if you have to go to your car and do a check, play the reference mix first and then play yours.
Yep.
Because you're trying to get yours in that same ballpark so it sounds good alongside that reference song.
I plateaued for so long in my mixing progress because I was not using reference mixes. And then as soon as I used a reference track, it became a whole new world of like, wow, okay, I have no low end. And it was just immediately apparent to everything I've ever done. Just having it right there to go solo the reference track. That's what a real song sounds like. Mute it, open up my song and let it just play. And I'm like, oh, I have no bass. That's for every song.
Do you know why you had no bass? That the main reason that would be you have too much bass in your speakers.
Mhm.
That's usually what that is.
Speakers. Yep.
So the speakers you have are amplifying the bass so that they sound good.
Mhm.
And then you mix and it sounds really cool. And then you put it on another system and it sounds totally different.
Yep.
And suddenly the bass is gone because that system doesn't amplify the bass.
Mhm. Having flat EQ is huge, which is why.
Yeah, it has to translate to other speakers, and that's why I love the VSX so much.
Helps you learn.
And the last thing, if you're cool moving on, the last thing I want to mention is about mastering.
Yeah.
So the other thing, just reference in a master is something I do every time. I'm a trained mastering engineer. I train my ears to hear all these different frequencies through a David Moulton's program called Golden Ears, which I'm not even sure if he sells anymore. There's a few different things on training your ears and frequencies now, even apps, as long as you have a good reference monitor, really good headphones, your speakers, whatever you're going to be mixing on, that's where you should be training your ears on those frequencies.
Yes.
So I take a reference mix in and I listen to it for mastering, I'm talking about. And I think this will answer the question of why it's important to get your mixes mastered too. So I listen to that mix, just the bass frequencies, and I match it to the bass frequencies of the reference track. Then I listen to the low mids, match it to the frequency, the dynamics, everything with the reference track. High mids and highs, I do the same thing. So I'm matching multiple things here. I do a pass for frequencies so that it sounds generally the same. It's not standing out awfully in the lows, low mids, high mids, and highs. It's pretty much the same sound as the reference. I do this with each thing. So frequencies first, then I go through dynamics and make sure that they're not like crazy dynamic. Hey, the mids in this part are like really loud, then really soft, then really loud, and the reference track didn't do that at all. So I tame that, I compress it, and then I go in and make sure the stereo field is really similar too. And on each frequency band, that the stereo field is similar. And then when once I'm done with that, there are a few other things like making the loudness levels just right, making sure it's not too loud for streaming if they're going to be putting it online. Some people still don't. Whatever. So, and negative 14 LUFS, negative 10 to 14.
Yep.
If you guys don't know what LUFS is, it's basically general loudness, so that dynamics aren't crazy. Where if you don't have the general loudness at the same level the other songs, your song's either going to sound way too loud or way too quiet compared to the other stuff they play. So anyway, so making it sound good on streaming services, making it sound like it belongs on a professional level, frequency, dynamics, and stereo field wise. And then if there's multiple songs, I have to make sure, even if they're mixed differently, sonically they're matching, dynamically and stereo field, they're matching pretty well unless they really didn't want them to. And so that they fit together and they sound all right, like if they all got played together on Spotify with other people's songs too. That sounds good. That's what mastering does.
Yep.
So just to also reinforce in that, the reference mix.
Exactly.
And how important that is.
Making sure that the mastering process gets you, to that point of this is my song and this is my song now matched to a song similar for streaming, listening purposes.
And then the master is the same way. Yeah. Well, you mentioned that. This is your song matched mixing wise is
Yep.
in the ballpark of your reference.
Exactly.
And then sonically and like all these minute things that polish it to make it sound like it fits with everything else that's out there. All right. Is that it, man? I'm trying not to sneeze. So.
All good. That covers a lot. I think that feels pretty good.
It's a deep dive. It really is a deep dive. And from the simple to probably as far as we could take most people without losing them.
Yep.
So yeah, reach out if you guys need help with this. As always, we have it on skool.com, skool.com/rock success, where we can discuss it further there as well. So, all right, man. Anything else to add? Or is that good?
That feels great to me. Just keep it simple.
Cool. All right. Then we'll see you guys next time.